Hey everybody, welcome to another episode Unemployed Half Dead.
Hey,
Hi Les, how you doing?
good. How are you?
Well, I am ready to dive into parenting. A more expectation versus reality type of thing. Parenting is difficult, to say the least. It's the most challenging yet rewarding thing I think you'll ever do. Most parents would probably agree. But we just kind of wanted to be real today and talk about, the things that maybe society expects of parents and what the reality is, and maybe like make people feel a little bit better about their parenting and not try to be that perfect parent.
By no means are anything that we're going to talk about any sort of like advice or anything like
This is
that.
all
This
from
is
personal
just
experience.
personal experience. You know what worked, not even what works for us, but like just how we parent our kids, and to remember that your kid is an individual. They're their own tiny human that's trying to navigate the world, and you relating to them because they are made from you is probably the most like special thing that you can do for them.
Yeah, at the end of the day, you just want them to grow up to be a good person, right? And
Yeah.
you want them to look back on, their childhood and see that they had somebody who was there for them, that cared for them, that loved them.
Yeah.
So there's a quote by Sue Atkins, and it says, "There's no such thing as a perfect parent, so just be a real one." And I like that because we've talked about in previous episodes, nobody's perfect, right? So to try to obtain perfection in something is silly. You're not going to attain it. But be a real one. I think to me just means be realistic in your parenting approach and know that there are going to be mistakes made, and there are going to be things that you probably look back on and wish you would have done better. But again, if you are going at it with the motivation that you're just trying to, do the best you possibly can with what you're given and show your child love and attention and raise them to be a good person and succeed in this world, then I think that's something you can be proud of.
Oh, totally agree. And to also remember to apologize for when you do mess up. I think that is
We've talked about
maybe,
that,
yeah.
like letting your kids know you're not perfect and you don't have all
Yeah.
the answers.
So that when they grow up and they become an adult, they don't feel that pressure of like, well, my parents appeared to have all the answers, so I must have to have all the answers now that I'm an adult. Like, that's an immense amount of pressure. So if you can teach your kids young, like, yeah, I'm an adult and I'm in a leadership role with you, but I'm still going to make mistakes because I don't have all of this figured out. There's no handbook that's given
Nobody does.
whenever you came out of the womb.
Trial and error, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think we'll just kind of dive right into this. But again, we're kind of going to lay out the expectation that we think maybe society has kind of put on people, and then our reality. And maybe this coincides with your reality. But the first one is the expectation. Having children won't change my relationship with my spouse. We will still make time for each other.
I think that is a wonderful idea. But obviously, when we were pregnant with Bliss, our first, we said this exact same thing. And I remember sitting on a patio with you, and it was a beautiful summer day, and I was very pregnant, and we were like,
Very
this is
pregnant.
we have to put our relationship first. We have to make sure that the two of us are good, so that we can raise a baby. And it was, I don't want to say it was naive. It was just more so, we didn't know what to expect. And for whatever reason, apparently we thought that our lives weren't going to change when this tiny human entered into the world.
I think we thought they would change, but we weren't
Weren't
ready
sure.
for the huge change that
Yeah.
we were naive.
Yeah.
Of course we were naive.
Yes, for sure.
I think we briefly talked about this on a prior episode, but this is something that's still a work in progress for us.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it always will be for any parent. One of the things we encourage people to do is like make time for each other, like set aside time, and do date nights. And we're guilty of not doing that nearly as much as we should. You and I were just talking before we got on here about last night. We had a wedding, and that was kind of our excuse to drop the kids off at my parents, and they stayed the night, and we have our little date night, which it was fun, but that wouldn't be my ideal date night. But like that's kind of the only way that we get our date nights is if we already have something that we have planned, to go to, like an event out. And we definitely need to work on that more, but I think that's something that lots of parents can probably relate to, because it's tough finding a babysitter.
It's expensive
If you
getting
don't
a
have
babysitter.
if you don't have family, we are so fortunate to have family that will watch our children, and we don't have to pay for it. But yeah, if you go out on a date and you spend money and then you have to pay the
Oh my
babysitter,
gosh.
in our situation, if you have children who usually don't want to be around most people, like when we're
It
gone.
makes it sound like they're
No.
recluse. No, they don't want to stay with
I
anybody
should've
that
phrased that
they
better.
are not familiar with.
Yeah, I
So
should've
they
phrased that
only
much
want
better.
to stay with family. They're kind
They're
of reluctant.
they're apprehensive to stay with people that are not family, immediate
Yes.
family.
Yes.
Yeah, no matter how great that person is.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, so it's always been a challenge for us to find, other people to watch our kids besides our parents, because we don't want to put that much pressure on them to watch them all the time. They need breaks too.
Well, I think it's been easier this year too, since both of them are in school, and it seems like grandparents are more so clamoring, like, oh, I want to spend that extra time with them because I don't get to see them during the day anymore. So that makes it a little bit easier whenever, we want to do something on the weekend. I don't have that guilt of like, you've already watched them all week long for us. And so, I don't want to ask you to then again watch them on the weekend too.
I think bottom line on this one is your relationship will change. It's inevitable.
It is.
And you mentioned earlier, before we got on here, about working on your relationship before you have children and making sure that you're in a great spot to where if you do have those times where you don't get to spend as much time with each other as you'd like, your relationship is still strong because you have that good foundation.
And I will say, I don't think we did a good job of that either. I don't think that we really
Again, we were naive.
built up our relationship at all to be able to support bringing a child in. And so it was just like, let's wing it. let's see how this goes. And that's, that's kind of a recipe for not the best situation. But also too, like, I mean, I can speak to being the one that's growing the human inside of them. And so, when you find out as a woman that you're pregnant, you become the caregiver immediately. Like there is, a weight of carrying somebody and caring for them now 24/7 that you literally did not have moments before, when you find out on that little pea stick that you're now caring for somebody 24/7. So everything that you put in your body, the amount of stress that you have, how you move your body, like they're in an instant, you're responsible for all of these things. And so to think that because that's going to change you, right? So then that means that's going to change the dynamics with your partner, because that, if it's unexpected, then that's a huge amount of stress. But even if it's not unexpected, like we weren't trying, but we weren't not trying, but still coming to that realization and that, working through that mentally of like, now you have a human growing inside of you, that changes the dynamic of your relationship.
Well, sure. And, I kind of naively, again, so naive, I was like, I don't become a father until the baby is born. And that's obviously not true. But yeah, you as the mother carrying that child do start to form that connection with the child that the father doesn't necessarily have, because again, if most people were of my mentality, they're like, I know that there's a child growing inside Leslie, but I don't have to take care of it yet. I can't take care of it yet. I can't bond with it other than, kind of rubbing your tummy and feeling them kick and going to the doctor together and seeing sonograms and things like that. But until the child was actually born, it's like there's not a whole lot I can do as the one who's not carrying this child.
Right. In your defense, I mean, obviously, like your life kind of went on as normal, other than the fact that you got the news that in 10 months
Yeah.
long time from now, there's going to be a tiny human in our life. So in your defense, like that is kind of hard to prepare for.
It is, but also the man needs to be a little bit more sympathetic, I think,
Yeah.
and realize what's all going on. Again, I just didn't, the first time around, I just didn't, kind of have that mentality. And then I feel like when you got pregnant with Levi, I kind of was like, oh my gosh, I know what she's going through now. I have a better understanding of it. And I think I did feel like I am a father right now as soon as we find out that we're pregnant, and not when our son's actually born.
Well, also we had an 18-month-old at that time too. So we had to care for her in addition to that. So I think you just, taking care of her whenever I couldn't, that was, a huge help too. But yeah, like having I think maybe we could have some more mental health support for our pregnant women.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just, all the things that they're going through, and the dynamics of how it's going to change. Like, wouldn't that be fabulous if there was somebody that as a pregnant woman you could go to talk to and just talk about like all of those things that happen in your brain that change instantly? Because I really never thought about doing that until I kind of started doing some research for this podcast, and I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't even know I was going through that. I was just like in a state of like freak out and that was it. Like, that would have been so fabulous if I would have been able to sit down with like a mental health professional, and they could walk you through those things. And I'm sure there's stuff out there for that. I was not aware of that.
Yeah, there is no guide for this, right? I mean, there are, people have written books, and there's podcasts, and there's, I'm sure a ton of resources out there, but I think it almost is overwhelming. You're like, I don't know which one.
What's reputable?
Yeah,
what's
which one
not?
to focus on.
What should I do? Yeah, it is. It's very overwhelming.
Let's move on to the next expectation. My child will not get any screen time, or very little screen time, maybe. I think I've used this word so many times, but naively, we're like, oh, our kids won't get on the iPads,
or we're going to limit that as
right.
Much as possible.
But look at yourself. Like, do we ourselves have screen time every single day? Are you constantly checking your phone? I mean, if you're like most people, yes, you're constantly looking at a screen, whether it's your phone or your computer or TV. So
fortunately, that's the society that we live in.
Yeah,
we're inundated with it.
To expect that your child is never going to get on screens, or very rarely get on screens, and they're going to occupy themselves other ways is probably not the most realistic approach. I hate to play the like back in our day card, but again, when we were growing up, and it wasn't that long ago, there were not all the things that there are out there available to kids today. Like, we had television, but
you didn't even have cable TV.
Yeah, I didn't have cable when I was a kid. Like, there was very little programming to watch. PBS, that was, Sesame Street and all that. There was, but
Mr. Rogers.
Yeah, we had to do other things, and now we're growing up in our kids are growing up rather in a world where technology is everywhere. And I don't think it's a bad thing to let them be on technology, because they're going to be using it their entire lives. So you can't be naive and say you can't get on technology, because even in schools, people are, using tablets and things like that. But obviously you have to do it in moderation, because research has shown that, longer hours of screen time are negatively associated with their, healthy development. There's actually a study that we pulled up to kind of reference that. This was a study by the BMC Public Health in Canada, and it focused on examining the association between screen time and developmental health in preschool age children. There are a lot of research and studies about children who are in school relating to screen time, but apparently there's not as much out there with preschool age children, so that's why they did this study. And their findings show that when screen use exceeds the recommended daily amount in the early years, it's often associated with developmental vulnerability. Specifically, more than 1 hour of screen time per day was positively associated with vulnerability in physical, social, emotional, and cognitive developmental health domains. Again, we know that screen time, it's probably going to be the norm in people's houses. I feel like, we kind of were very conscious of screen time when our children were very little. And then as they started to get a little bit older, it's almost like, hey, I got to get this done. So yeah, you can jump on the iPad and
they get
play
like
Minecraft or
I was gonna say,
whatever.
they get interested in specific things like games and YouTube videos.
Lots of like YouTube. I feel like this is probably off on a tangent, but YouTube is like replacing television for the younger generation.
Yeah.
Like people don't watch movies as much anymore
Yeah.
and actual TV shows. I think people are gravitating towards YouTube because obviously there's just so much content out there, but it's accessible to everybody, right? So
It is. Yeah, that's true.
it has nothing really to do with what we're talking about, but just a random thought that
digress.
popped in my head.
But yeah, and also, when your kids are in your house, use that time to teach them self-control, teach them,
Yes.
educate them on, how being in front of a screen and consuming content all the time is not good for your brain. Like, you have to have output. You have to create things, because you can't just keep consuming. That would be like eating all the time and never pooping. I mean, like, seriously, not, nothing being eliminated. Like, when you have content coming in, you have to create, you have to get away, and you have to, sometimes just like imaginative play, like those kinds of things that help with communication and cognitive development and problem solving, all of those things that our kids desperately need. Communication skills. I mean, there's so many studies out right now that are showing that our kids are lacking the ability to communicate with one another face to face, and like they would rather text. So can we even like begin to think about what like having like assertive conversation, like trying to problem solve and those kinds of things. So being able to teach your kids how to limit their screen time and why it's important to do that while they're in your house is so imperative.
Yeah, and again, you're modeling that behavior, right? So I'm thinking back to like, days that I would work and stare at a computer for 8 hours a day. And then, of course, you'd be looking at your phone, and then you get off work and you just kind of want to sit and watch TV. Like, at a certain point in the day, my eyes would be so strained, and I just feel like I need to get away from that. And your kids are obviously the same way. Like, when they're on the screens too much, they're going to be strained. Their eyes are going to be strained. They're going to feel like, they just need to kind of step away. But again, modeling that behavior, like if you're not on your phone or, and it's so hard to do. I mean, it's way easier said than done, right? But like putting that phone down and just spending some time with them away from a screen. My family, we used to play a lot of board games, things like that. That was our bonding time, and it can be, whatever your family's interested in. But yeah, I mean, it's pretty sound advice to do that. But again, implementing it is another story, because I know how hard that is. We're bombarded by content, and our phones are addictive.
I was just going to say,
there's studies out there that show how many times a day you look at your phone, and it's absurd. And you just do it without even thinking.
Yep, absolutely. And so think about that on a child's level, who like you're consciously aware of every time you check your phone, and you're just like, God, put it down. Like I don't need to do that. When a kid is not, they're not consciously aware of that. They don't have the bigger picture of being able to say like, I've picked up my tablet, 6 times today to look at it. Like they don't have that insight. So you have to be the one that guides and teaches and leads.
And the last thing I'll say about this before we move on is just kind of going back to what you said. The kids don't know how much time they don't know that they need a break.
No.
Necessarily, and we've seen that in our kids when they've had a lot of screen time and we ask them to get off of it, they throw a tantrum. And it's because they're they want more, they're addicted, right? But like just that's an indicator right there that they have been on the screen too long. The American Academy of Pediatrics recommends avoiding screens for children younger than 18 to 24 months. And then children over the age of 2 should be limited to 1 to 2 hours of screen time per day. So that's their guideline. It's going to be different in every home, obviously, but anything more than a couple hours is obviously not recommended because, again, these studies show that it definitely impairs their development in their brain. So
yeah, very much so.
You want to read the next expectation?
Oh,
This is a struggle for us.
Yeah. The expectation is my kid won't eat McDonald's or other, quote, junk food. Let's just go and say, well, we are not not great at this. We don't have, we try and buy the best quality food that our kids will eat, but flat out we've got, well, Bliss is really picky, Levi not so much. But I mean, sometimes just having a full belly is what the goal is.
That's a small victory right there. Just getting them to eat something other than like, I want candy or I want a snack, or wake up at 8 a.m. and they want, a donut or something.
And teaching them again of why we don't want them to eat, that is paramount. Like I've really tried to, instead of saying like, no, you can't have that, but like, this will make your body feel really, really good. This might not make your body feel really good, and really educating them on how food truly affects them. I just had a conversation with Levi yesterday, and we were talking about food, and I said something about how it affects his brain, and he like laughed at me and gave me a funny look, and he's like, how does food affect your brain? And so we had a big conversation of how, when your food is digested and how it can give you brain fog if you eat the wrong foods, or how it can make you feel, more energetic and then crash and all of this kind of stuff. And I mean, he was totally into it, but that's stuff that kids don't even think about. And so rather than saying, no, you can't have this, it's explaining it of like, man, I love you so much and I want you to learn how to take care of your body, and that's my job, to teach you how to learn how to take care of your body, and this is why we're not eating it. Like that gentle approach. And I don't always have that gentle approach. There's some days when it's just like, no, you can't have, that whatever. But I think trying to overall, like 80% of the time, give a nice gentle explanation of why. And they're so much more responsive to that too, rather than a no and a meltdown.
Well, and our children have some food intolerances, so I think they've seen firsthand, like, if I continue to eat this type of food, I don't feel good. And when we cut it out, they feel better. So they're starting to understand that.
Like that direct correlation. And they're also a little bit older, so that, that helps.
Yeah. But again, I think it also goes back to modeling, behavior. Like if you're eating healthy, and again, in moderation, right? We're not talking about like every single meal you're eating, every, food on the food pyramid that you're supposed to. And, there's going to be times where you just like have to eat out, grab a quick meal or whatever. But consistency, right? Trying to slowly form those habits that you're eating healthy, and they see that. And honestly, that's not where we're at yet with our, like, we eat differently than our kids most of the time. Like you'll fix them something separate for dinner than what we're having. And I think back to my childhood, I was extremely picky. My mom can attest to that. So I get it. I was very picky. And even into my 20s, I was very picky. Like my appetite for vegetables has only kind of come around in the last few years, I think. But I think as you get older, you start to realize, like, hey, the food I eat does affect how I feel. So it's important to mention
like how you feel, how you age. There's a lot of factors in that.
Well, in a world that is mostly processed food, and people are getting sick and cancers and all that, I don't think there's any. It's no coincidence that people are getting more and more sick because of the food that they're putting in their body. So it's important to teach your kids, like, your food can affect your longevity.
Yeah, absolutely.
Quality of life. The next expectation, my child's needs have to come before my own. Kind of that mentality, like I have to do what I have to do to make them happy and take care of them, and then my needs are kind of in the back seat. And this can be a tricky one, because I think sometimes people tend to confuse this with like providing basic needs. Obviously you're going to make sure that your child is clothed and fed and sleeping. But as a parent, you have to be yourself. You have to be mentally fit, physically fit, emotionally fit to be able to take care of your child. If you're, running at, 50%, that's going to affect how you parent.
Oh, absolutely. I am a huge advocate of self-care for parents. And I know self-care is a buzzword these days. So I'm not talking about, your glass of wine when you come home to de-stress, or the bubble bath or things like that sometimes people tend to, or, having the dessert or whatever people tend to classify as self-care. I'm talking about healing your trauma, working through emotional trauma, understanding who you are, exploring the habits that you have, and then trying to fill yourself with good things like, hobbies and interests and things like that. Like, that's the self-care that I refer to whenever I say you have to take care of yourself. And I know that there's probably a lot of parents out there that will push back, and they'll just be like, I don't have time for that.
That's always a big excuse, right?
I don't have time for that.
Yeah.
I have kids. I work full time. And I will say I that used to be my mentality. And when our kids were 3 and 1, I had like a surrender moment where I just said, I can't do this anymore. I could physically take care of our kids, like you said, they were clean and they were fed and stuff, but emotionally, I couldn't take care of them. I was at a spot where I felt like, especially Bliss started asking a lot more questions that I couldn't answer for her because I felt lost in my own life. I didn't know who I was. I was carrying a lot of trauma that I hadn't worked through. And I just was not able to emotionally be there for our kids. And that scared the crap out of me because I knew that they were going to need more and more and more. And I wasn't able to give that to them. And so through that, when they were young, I started getting up early and I started pouring into myself first thing in the morning. I started reading, and instead of listening to, talk radio or something, I started listening to audiobooks, quality podcasts that, taught me how to heal trauma, how to move through it. A lot of the time, I didn't even know what was going on. I was just bringing up things, and then my body was doing the work for me. So if you think you don't have time because you have children, I encourage you to explore that thought and to really decide, is it that you don't have time, or that it's too scary to go and dive deep? Because I will tell you, it truly is. It's a scary process, but it's so liberating too. Like, I felt like I got my life back. I know who I am. I have boundaries. There's so much freedom within that. But it takes hard work, and it takes time too. I mean, I'm 4 years into that journey and I'm still learning things about myself. I mean, I'll bring things up to you that I'm like, hey, can we talk about this? Because I didn't even know it affected our relationship. Mm-hmm. And, I'm so thankful that you have the capacity to hold that space for me to just say like, hey, this is what I'm feeling. And you don't take it personally if it correlates to our relationship, or something that you have directly done that you weren't even aware of that triggered me, that you're just able to like hold space and be like, hey, I didn't even know that. Thanks for letting me know. And maybe there's we can work on it or whatever. But I digress. That got really deep really fast. But that is why like I said, I am such a huge advocate for parents and self-care, because I know coming out on the other side, like the before and after, it's amazing. It's so liberating. It makes you feel like you can actually parent in a compassionate way, and not just like, stop crying, you don't have anything to cry about, knock it off. Not those kinds of things, but like really sit down and be like, hey, you look like you're really, really upset. Maybe we should talk about it. Like there were so many things that I didn't have in my toolbox that I needed to get in there in order to parent, especially our children. Our kids aren't like they're not special or set apart or anything like that, but our children are very sensitive children, and they don't respond to being hard or yelled at or anything. I mean, I don't think anybody really responds well to that, but for them especially, they respond well to that compassion, sitting next to them, putting your arm around them and saying, hey, even when you look angry or you look frustrated, like let's talk about it. And if you don't want to talk about it right now, that's fine, we can talk about it later. But just having that compassion and that capacity to actually meet their needs, that comes through self-care of yourself. Because if you don't have that yourself, if you don't love yourself enough to say, hey, you got really frustrated in that situation, let's work through that internally, then you're not going to have that with your kids.
Couple things. First, just like going back to your journey, like it's been incredible to watch from my perspective, where you were, 5-10 years ago to where you've, come now. And I think I've told people this before. I felt like in the beginning of our relationship, I was kind of, I don't want to use the word rock because I myself did not have myself put together either, but I kind of felt like you leaned on me a lot for things. And as we've, progressed in our marriage, I am the one who leans on you for things. I come to you for advice and, parenting, advice, whatever it is. So it's just been really awesome to see you mature and go through your own journey and become, the amazing mother and wife that you are today. Secondly, you mentioned talking to your children and kind of, talking about, emotions and sitting down and having conversation with them. I think it's so important. We talked about it previously. We don't give our children enough credit, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of people try to talk to them like they're children. And they are children. I get that, but they're also human beings, just like you and me. And I always use the example of, we feel like our daughter is 7 going on 17. She's always been so mature in her conversation and her emotions. And we have conversations all the time that feel like I'm having a deeper conversation with her than I have with some adults in my life. So, they do understand a lot more than sometimes we give them credit for. So sitting down and having a normal conversation, quote, normal conversation with them, instead of just be like, you're a child, you don't understand, one day you will, but right now you don't, you never know. Maybe they already understand.
Maybe they're confused about it and they need, that clarification.
And you just saying like, oh, stop it. You're being too loud. Stop crying. You don't need to cry about that. Like, that is not the right approach for any child, I don't think. Yeah. And some children may not be able to, you might not be able to have that conversation with them quite yet. And you might have to explain it a little differently than you would, but your children, so which conversations you can have and not have. And then lastly, going back to the self-care, I know personally when I was going through some of my struggles, anxiety and things like that, because I wasn't taking care of myself. I wasn't taking care of myself mentally, physically. Obviously it affected my parenting. How good of a parent can you expect to be when you are laying in bed because you can't even get up that day because you're so anxious, you're just confused as to why this is happening to you. For me personally, it was because of things I did. I understand there's, other people in situations where it's going to be totally different, but for me, it took, taking care of myself before I was able to recover from that and then be the parent that I wanted to be. Same with our, we've talked a lot about my alcohol-free journey. I couldn't be the parent that I wanted to be or even needed to be when I was drinking. So making sure that I righted that wrong in my life so that I could be there for my children. I know we talked a lot about that one, but that was I feel like a very important one and one that we needed to kind of dive into.
Well, I think it's so important because, we can so quickly make excuses because people automatically think like, oh, if you put your needs before your kids, then you're a bad parent. Yep. Like you're just labeled as that. And it's such a misconception. And I'm not talking about putting your needs before your kids like, your kid needs to go to bed, but, you want to go off and do something or watch the show or, not trivial things like that. I'm talking about like taking deep care of yourself, figuring out who you are, how much self-love you have or how worthy you feel yourself, because on the outside we kind of look like we're doing all the right things, right? Like I looked like I was doing the right things. I checked the boxes. I had a career. I had a marriage. I had the kids. I had all the things. We have a nice house. I checked all the boxes, but inside I was lonely. I was dark. I was sad. I felt like I had nothing to give. I was full to capacity with all the things that you don't want to be full to capacity with. And you definitely can't teach what you don't know. So you have to figure those things out for yourself. You have to reparent yourself, and a lot of that is going into like inner child work. I had to do a lot with little Leslie and meet her needs and work through some of that stuff, and then begin to be able to parent little Bliss and little Levi.
I think that's so important, because you kind of opening up and maybe sharing some things that are pretty deep and personal. There's probably so many people out there that can relate to that.
I hope so.
Yeah, a lot of moms that probably have that mom guilt, and hopefully just hearing, more and more people talk about it, and like, it's okay to work on yourself. It doesn't mean
it's imperative.
It doesn't mean that because you did, took an hour out of your day to spend, meditating or doing yoga or whatever, and instead of playing, with your child, that doesn't mean that you're a bad parent, because you are making yourself a better parent, a better person, that is going to be capable of raising your child and showing them the love that they need.
Yeah.
Next expectation. This one's not quite as deep probably, but I will never let my child sleep in our bed. And I know I was a huge component of this from the get-go. I was like, nope, never. They're never going to sleep in our beds. And they didn't really a whole lot, maybe a little bit, but you've kind of slept in their beds.
I don't recall ever saying this.
No, I don't think you did.
Okay. And I know our kids never slept in our bed. Instead, I took the approach of I sleep now with our children. I fall asleep with them, and most nights, since we got a dog too, who took my spot, he sleeps where I sleep now. But I love every night that I get to fall asleep with our kids,
and our kids love it.
Our kids love it too.
Not to interrupt, but like every night they're like, "Mom, are you sleeping with us?" And it, like, at this point they should know it's like yes, but like they're every once in a while when you don't, they get very disappointed.
Yeah, but I love it because it's quiet and it's dark and they don't have anything else to do. So what do they want to do during that time? They want to talk. Mm-hmm. They want to talk about anything, what's going on, what they did during their days, all kinds of different, like, random questions. But I love, 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 love that time. And I would never, ever, I'll never regret any night that I spent in their beds, because it's so precious. And I know probably sooner than later, they're not going to want me there anymore. They're going to be able to do that on their own. They're going to be able to put themselves to sleep on their own. So I treasure every single moment of it. And I know you probably get lonely going to bed by yourself. I don't know, maybe not. Maybe you're just used to it now and you're just like, it's cool. I got the whole bed. But yeah, I don't regret a moment of it.
I think my advice would be for parents is like, at the end of the day, you gotta do what you gotta do to get a good night's sleep. So if you haven't had a good night's sleep in a long time, and your child's crying and you're trying to like not bring them in your bed, it's okay to bring them in your bed if it means that you're gonna get a good night's sleep and be well rested and not be a walking zombie. I think you do what you have to do. There was a small study by Merritt Keller and Wendy Goldberg. They did it of 83 preschoolers, and they found that children who slept alone from an early age fell asleep more on their own and slept more through the night. But the preschoolers who co-slept from an early age were more likely to dress themselves, entertain themselves, and work out problems with peers on their own. Another study of 205 families showed that by age 18, children who bed shared did not differ from solitary sleepers in their sleep problems or mental health. So basically, at the end of the day, when the child grows up, there's so many different factors that go into their well-being that these studies are saying that, whether they slept with a parent or they slept alone really didn't play a factor. So something to maybe keep in mind. Don't focus so much on that. Just focus on maybe the present and like, do I need a good night's sleep?
Right.
Or maybe from your perspective, do I want to spend that, extra 15, 20 minutes a day with my children before they fall asleep talking and kind of maybe that quiet time where there's no other distractions and get to spend time with them.
Yeah, for sure. And I think a lot of times we look at things like sleeping in a vacuum. We don't give it like the broad, picture. I don't think it really matters if you co-sleep, if you don't co-sleep. Like your kid knows that, if your kid knows that they're loved and they're taken care of and you're doing all the good things for them, I don't think it's going to
and again it's
just
affect them. It works for some people and
it does.
For other people it won't work. I don't think anybody should be out there saying like you have to do this or else the child's not gonna grow up to be whatever when they grow up. There's obviously studies that we just referenced that kind of say otherwise. So you have
to do what is best for you, your family, and your partner, because obviously if you have a partner that says like absolutely I can't sleep, like I can't do it, I'm a worse person in the morning, I can't do it, then you have to reevaluate that. That's a situation where you have to reevaluate. But if it's just a matter of like you're worried about your kiddo's development if you co-sleep or not, I don't think that it's the worry is
for like
warranted.
You and me, you can pretty much fall asleep anytime, anywhere. Me, I've never been a great sleeper, and I need conditions to be pretty exact for me to fall asleep. So that's why I was always, I prefer to sleep on my own. I don't, I didn't necessarily want our kids in our bed, not because I didn't want them near me or, whatever.
Mostly because they thrash around like a shark.
Yeah, I just didn't get good night sleeps. And I think a lot of people can probably relate to that.
Yeah.
And, but again, not just sleeping, anything, I don't think it's anybody's right to tell somebody how to parent,
Oh yeah.
So, everything that we've said today on the podcast is just from our experience, what works best for us. Maybe some of this is relatable. Maybe some of this is something people can take to, their own relationships with their children. But again, at the end of the day, you're going to do what works for your family, and you can take outside advice. But it doesn't mean that it's set in stone.
Yeah. And it's like you said at the beginning, it's trial and error sometimes.
It is. One last one. I know we're kind of running short on time here, but expectation. Treasure every second of your kids being young because it will pass by so fast. I mean, how many times have we been out in public with our, maybe not as much now, but when our kids were really little, and someone older will stop us and say, how cute they are. And they're like, oh my gosh, treasure every moment because it passes by so fast.
And they'll tell us how old their kids
are. And you do realize that yes, every moment is precious, and but there's also, it's okay to be in frustrating moments and be like, ugh, I'm just not enjoying this. Like I can't wait for this phase to pass.
Yeah.
Like, that does not make you a bad parent.
No, not at all. Do you know any parent that their kid is going through like the crazy twos, and it's hard, right? It's hard sometimes, and it's moment to moment. That is like it's such a volatile stage that you're just
extreme
like
highs and your low lows.
Yeah, like you feel like you're just you're kind of living in bizarro world.
I think though, like as our kids have gotten older, I have realized like even in the moments where I'm frustrated, like I do have that also perspective. Like, hey, they're not going to be young much longer. Like I'm still, yes, I'm frustrated in this moment, but I'm still going to try to, enjoy these times. Because, even with our kids only being 7 and 5, there are times where I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they're 7 and 5.
I know.
Like
just think about like 10 years.
Newborns.
Yeah. 10 years from now, they're going to be into the thick of teens, and it's going to be completely different. And like a part of me is like, oh man, I'm so excited to watch them grow and see who they become.
But there's also it's bittersweet because there's that sadness too.
Yeah. Because right now they think that we hung the moon, and they come to us with questions, and that, they think that we're just the bee's knees, and it's not always going to be like that.
And it will be funny for us, 5-10 10 years down the road for us to listen back to this and just hear our perspective of in this moment. 'Cause,
Right.
you know, again, we are, as far as being parents, we're relatively new parents. You know, 7 and 5 is not old, you know,
Yeah.
that's how old our kids are. So still have a lot to learn. You know,
Oh,
there might
yeah.
be people who are out there who have been, you know, parents for 30, 40 years, and maybe some of what we've said they kind of laugh and chuckle at, and like, yeah, I remember when I used to think like that. Just wait till they become, you know, teenagers type of thing. But
Oh yeah.
again, that's the great thing, that we're kind of in the moment, you know, and I feel like we've gained a lot of, you know, unique perspective and experiences from our short time as parents, and there's just so much more to learn, and I'm excited for every second of it.
Me too. I think being a parent is it's really freaking awesome. You know, if you have the capacity, if you had, you know, you learn so much about yourself, because your children mirror back your insecurities, the things that you need to work on yourself, which is the most frustrating and honorable thing about children, is that they show you what you need to work on. And if you answer the call, fantastic, your life is going to be 1,000 times better. But if you're resentful and you're reluctant to kind of maybe put your ego aside and be like, I don't want to work on that, I don't want to do that, then it may be a little bit more frustrating for you. But it is I think I had wrote down like parenting is joyous and painful, neatly wrapped in one package. It
That's a good way to put it, yeah.
It truly is. It's pain and it's joyous all in one. But the love that you get is phenomenal.
Yeah.
Phenomenal.
I think the thing
and you get to give.
You do. And I think the thing at the end of the day I always try to focus on is, like, you know, they're not going to remember, like, you know, toys you bought them and like, you know, things like that. They're going to remember the experiences they had with you, right? Like, when I think back to being a child, I think about a lot of the experiences, you know, and I don't think about the times where I got yelled at or had to go to my room. Like, you think of the joyous experience. So you want to create as many happy experiences for your child. And that starts with you spending time with them. Again, not always being involved in work or, you know, being on your phone. Like, we're all guilty of it. Like, we just need a little me time. I just need to sit down and just mindlessly scroll through TikTok or Instagram and you know, again,
it doesn't make you feel better.
I'm not saying you can't do that, but, you know, and I'm talking to myself honestly right now. I'm just
same here.
Putting the phone down and going and playing a game with your kids, you know, that's going to mean so much to them. Our Barbies.
The worst. Yeah.
So, all right. I really enjoyed this conversation with you.
Me too. I always like talking about our kids and parenting, and
hope everybody else did too. Thank you so much for listening. Again, we do have an Instagram. We have YouTube. I don't know when this is going to be published, but we might have a website by that time, hopefully. I'm working on it. So, but again, thank you so much for all your support. We really appreciate it. And, you know, as we continue to kind of build this community, and then hopefully in future episodes, we can have, you know, some guests and feedback from other people, and really, that's what we're really looking for.
We can nerd out with maybe some people, some experts.
Yeah, that would be great.
That would be fabulous.
Well, thank you so much for listening, and we hope you all have a wonderful day.
Yes, thank you so much.